In 2057, the sun is already dying and losing its solar power, which spells the doom of mankind. As such, a plan to revive the sun by creating a new one inside of it is launched to save Earth. It is named the Icarus Project, and the plan is to deliver a payload that will explode within the sun, thereby revitalizing it. Initially, the Icarus project failed 7 years ago when the first Icarus spaceship that was supposed to reach the sun suddenly stopped just as it was coming nearer to the star. At the present, another attempt to revive the sun is initiated by a group of scientists aboard the spaceship named Icarus II. By this point in their journey, 16 months have already passed by. The group consists of Cyril the psychologist, Robert the physicist, James the ship's engineer, Cassie the pilot, Corazon the biologist, Trey the navigator, Harvey the second-in-command and communications officer, and Kaneda the captain of the ship. Realizing that they are fast approaching the dead zone, which is an area where they will finally lose communication with Earth, Robert delivers a heartfelt video message to his family. However, James does not appreciate Robert's video message because it took him a long time to record. As a result, James cannot deliver his message anymore to his family and friends, prompting him to angrily assault the physicist. The other crew members immediately split the two away from each other, and James is quickly taken to Cyril's room for his mental health examination. There, the engineer admits that the 16 months are already taking its toll on him, so Cyril advises him to stay inside a virtual room of Earth for 2 hours to refresh his mental state. Inside the virtual room, James sees a realistic view of a seaside and a forest on Earth. He then tells the AI to repeat the crashing of the waves because it is the one that calms him the most. As a result of this therapeutic session, James quickly seeks Robert to apologize for his earlier aggression. Meanwhile, Kaneda is intensely looking at the sun inside the observation room. Corazon, who has just arrived at the room, snaps Kaneda's intense gaze. After giving her a report about their oxygen levels being enough for the whole trip, Corazon shares her opinion about the doomed Icarus I, telling him that it surely did not stop due to a lack of oxygen. Because he is still curious about the ill-fated Icarus I, Kaneda watches the last video message of Captain Pinbacker, the captain of the first Icarus spaceship. A while later, they finally reach the area near Venus where the crew members collectively watch in awe at the sight of the beautiful and bright planet. However, Hardy later informs the group that he picked up an unusual sound emanating from the dark side of Venus. He tells them that it is the distress signal of Icarus I, which they find impossible because it has already been 7 years since the first Icarus launch. But Kaneda and Corazon believe that it is still somewhat possible since the distress signal points out the fact that Icarus I may still be functional. This anomalous survival of the first Icarus has left the crew members confused and doubtful. After identifying the possible location of Icarus I, the crew members discuss how they can approach it, but James attempts to be the voice of reason among them. He tells them that they have a bomb to deliver to the sun and that if it dies, their mission will also become a failure like the first Icarus ship. However, Cyril counters this by saying that if they rescue Icarus I, they will have another bomb to use which will give them more chances of success. When James suggests that they should have a vote, Cyril disagrees with this because he believes that the decision must be given to the expert regarding the theory behind the payload. Since he is the physicist among them, Robert has been given the heavy responsibility to decide on the path that they should undertake. Pressured by this responsibility, Robert attempts to simulate the detonation of the payload using the ship's AI. Because the simulation has shown that there is a possibility that the bomb might not explode, he has finally decided that they should rescue Icarus I so that they can have a backup payload. And so, according to his decision, their ship has now changed its trajectory. However, they immediately encounter a problem when Trey forgot to realign the ship's shield toward the sun, damaging their ship and putting their lives in danger. Trey screams in frustration while apologizing to the crew for missing this small yet important detail. The crew members do not know the extent of the ship's damage because their devices have been fried by the solar heat, and James tells them that 2 persons are needed for the repair. The captain immediately volunteers and James nominates Robert. The physicist has no choice but to accept. With this in mind, the crew quickly assemble and head where they are needed. As Kaneda and Robert embark on a spacewalk to fix the ship's damage, pilot Cassie overrides the ship's AI and manually tilts the ship to provide the two some shade from the sun's heat. In their examination, the two successfully determine that 4 damaged panels need immediate repair. After fixing the first panel, the crew members inside celebrate Kaneda's announcement that they can fix them all. However, tragedy unknowingly strikes them when their garden room, their main source of oxygen, suddenly explodes and burns. The crew fails to notice this because they are busy celebrating. Still caught in a celebratory mood, James lifts Trey's spirit, who is still anxious and guilty from his earlier blunder. But panic comes back quickly when the ship's A decides to take control of the ship once again due to the imminent jeopardizing of the mission. Learning that the oxygen garden is on fire, Corazon immediately runs to the garden room. Cassie advises Kaneda and Robert to promptly get inside the ship or else they will burn from the sun's heat once Icarus returns to its original position. But the captain insists on staying because they have to fix the remaining damage panels, otherwise the whole ship will explode. Cassie and Harvey attempt to override the ship again, but James refuses because he believes the mission is much more important than prioritizing Kaneda and Robert's safety. Despite the danger, Captain Kaneda agrees with this sentiment, so he orders the ship's A to return to its original position. Meanwhile, Corazon begs the crew members to allow her inside the burning oxygen garden, but of course, they are not letting her in due to the danger. Seeing the futility of saving the garden, James decides to burn out the rest of the oxygen inside the room so that the fire can die much faster. This is a gamble because it means they are cutting the supply of their oxygen reserve meant for the whole trip. As this is happening, Icarus is now nearing its original position. Kaneda and Robert now have to return if they want to live. With only one panel left, the captain advises Robert to return inside while he finishes the task. Just as he finishes it, the ship is now returned to its original position, exposing Kaneda to the deadly heat. But instead of moving back, Kaneda seems stunned by the flare and cannot look away. For this reason, he burns to a crisp and Robert barely survives the ordeal. After the traumatizing event, Trey is sedated because he wants to kill himself. Since Harvey is the second in command, he is now the new captain of the ship. Due to their oxygen being diminished to the point where they will not reach the intended location to deliver the payload, they have no choice but to head to Icarus I and hope for the best. A while later, Corazon, James, and Cassie discreetly discuss the prospect of losing 2 more members to have enough oxygen reserve for delivering the payload. They put this conversation aside for the time being. Afterward, Cassie talks to Robert about the idea of dying, telling him that she is sure they will die and that she is afraid. But the physicist responds that he is not scared at all due to their noble mission. Finally, they reach Icarus I, and the male crew members prepare to dock it while Corazon and Cassie stay put. Upon entering the spaceship, the first thing that they notice is the thick layer of dust that covers the walls. They go further down where they discover a thriving oxygen garden, making the crew members happy and relieved for discovering such a bountiful source for their survival. However, they notice that the crew of Icarus I is missing and find a recording where Pinbacker, who is noticeably unhinged, was announcing that they have abandoned their mission. Although Robert later finds that Icarus I's payload is intact, James discovers that the ship cannot move because it had been sabotaged, which means all they have done is for nothing. Searle also discovers the scorched remains of Icarus I's crew members. While examining the corpses, Icarus II suddenly shakes and loses control, disentangling itself from the other ship. Because of this, Cassie advises the men to get back to the airlock of Icarus I, but they cannot link the 2 ships together again because the outer airlock has been destroyed. Still wanting to continue their mission to save mankind, James sees a nearby spacesuit and decides to have Robert wear it because he is the only one that knows how to operate the payload delivery. But Harvey stubbornly orders him to surrender the spacesuit to him just because he is the captain. Here, James has an idea that might help them survive altogether. The plan involves opening the inner airlock, which will throw them forcefully out of the ship and into Icarus II. Since outer space is extremely cold, James figures that they will have to cover themselves with materials from Icarus I and hope for the best. While they are ripping the materials off the walls, Searle notices that the computer is down, which means that one of them must be left behind to manually open the airlock from inside. He decides to volunteer for the fatal task. With everything set, Searle opens the airlock door, flinging the 3 out to the void and into the second Icarus ship. However, things fail to go smoothly according to plan as Harvey's direction changes due to hitting debris, thus launching him far from the intended spot. As a result, he freezes and dies from the extreme coldness of space. With Robert and James successfully retrieved, Cassie summarily tells Searle that they are leaving him behind as they have no way to rescue him. But Searle does not mind this. Somewhat obsessed with the sun, Searle spends his last moments looking intently at the star from the observation room of Icarus I, the same place where the other crew members had burned to death. Now with only 4 members left, the surviving crew members discuss the mishap from earlier. Based on their findings, they conclude that someone manually disentangled the 2 ships from each other. As such, James believes that it is Trey, who is still tranquilized in the medical room of the ship. Robert finds no reason for the tranquilized Trey to sabotage the mission, especially because he feels guilty for what happened. At this moment, Corazon informs them that since they lost 2 crew members, there is more oxygen. However, she proposes that to truly have enough oxygen for the whole trip, they need to sacrifice another person. Since she is heavily implying that it is Trey that they have to sacrifice, Robert calls them out for their lack of humanity. With the success of the mission in his mind, James volunteers to eliminate Trey, but Robert and Cassie disagree with the decision. However, James is resolute in his decision to kill Trey, so he promptly heads to the medical room to finish the job. Upon arriving there, he sees that Trey is not at the table where he is supposed to be placed. Instead, what he sees is the bloody and lifeless body of Trey. Robert, Cassie, and Corazon swiftly run to the room and also see this, concluding that Trey had ended his life. Suddenly, James blames Robert for all of the deaths that occurred because he is the one who made the decision to divert their path toward Icarus I. Because of this, the 2 men briefly fight again, venting their frustrations to each other. After their short fight, the crew members go back to their assignments. Robert asks the ship's AI about their vitals. Surprisingly, the AI tells him that they do not have enough oxygen to deliver the payload, which is different from Corazon's calculations. Contrary to their belief, it turns out that they are not just 4 members inside the ship, there is also another unknown and uninvited person aboard. Robert asks where this 5th crew member is located, and the AI directs him to the observation room. He hurriedly heads to the observation room where he sees someone looking at the intense flare from the sun. The unknown figure speaks cryptically about the end of times. Approaching and looking at him closer, Robert realizes that it is the captain of Icarus I, Pinbacker. All of a sudden, the delusional Pinbacker violently assaults Robert, leaving him with a nasty wound in his chest. Robert quickly flees from the scene and heads straight to the airlock to protect himself away from the murderous and unhinged captain. Seeing that he cannot enter the airlock, Pinbacker leaves. Without anyone else noticing him yet, Pinbacker first sabotages the ship's coolant and mainframe, which regulates the temperature inside Icarus II. He then kills Corazon, who has just discovered a surviving plant inside the burnt-down oxygen garden. Due to Pinbacker's sabotage, the lights of the ship have gone out, plunging the remaining crew members into darkness. As James attempts to fix the system, he sees Robert in one of the cameras and talks to him. There, Robert informs him that the murderous Pinbacker is inside their ship, alarming James. James hurries to the room where the coolant is and sees the sabotage that was committed. He tries to fix this, but the coolant liquid is too cold for his body to handle. Still, he manages to at least revive the lights. Unsure whether he will be able to fully fix the ship's system or not, he tells Robert that he has to manually deliver the payload to the sun. Having no other choice, Robert accepts the task. Meanwhile, Cassie encounters Pinbacker and tries her best to hide from him. When Pinbacker is about to take Trey's body for some unknown reason, Cassie takes a knife and stabs the murderous captain before running away from him. At this point, James attempts once again to fix the coolant and the mainframe, but this time he succeeds. However, while getting out of the coolant liquid, the mainframe that is going down traps his legs. Because of this, his legs are now bleeding due to the mainframe's weight. In his last dying moments, he reiterates to Robert that he needs to proceed with a manual detonation of the payload before finally freezing to death. As such, Robert quickly suits up in his astronaut attire and heads to the airlock to manually open it. After opening it, he walks toward the room where the payload is located. On his way there, he sees James' frozen remains. He then manually operates the system to initiate the separation of the payload from the ship. Successfully setting the manual separation, Robert stumbles to the floor due to the heaviness of his suit. Still, he pushes on so that he can reach the payload. As the payload slowly disentangles from the ship, Robert jumps out of the ship and into the container that has the payload. Being too close to the sun, Icarus burns and finally explodes. At this time, inside the payload's container, which is hurling toward the sun, Robert notices a bloody handprint on the wall. Walking further inside, he sees wounded Cassie, who is unable to speak due to lacking energy and blood. When Robert tries to ask her where Pinbacker is, the murderous captain suddenly appears and lifts the physicist with his superhuman strength. While choking him, Pinbacker tells him that he has been speaking with God for the past 7 years. According to him, God wants everyone on Earth to go to heaven. Pinbacker then dangles Robert at the edge of the payload, but before he can throw Robert down, Cassie runs toward the murderous captain to prevent him from following through with his plan. Due to his burns, Robert easily and brutally rips off the murderous captain's skin. However, as a result of this ripping, both Robert and Cassie fall from a great height. But they suddenly stop falling, almost as if the gravity inside the container had changed due to coming close to the sun. It is here that Cassie encourages Robert to proceed with the detonation of the payload and finally finish the mission. For this reason, the wounded Robert hurriedly retrieves some essential tools for the detonation, leaving Cassie behind. After setting it up, Robert manually controls the explosion of the bomb, although he is unsure whether or not it will work, echoing the AI's earlier simulation result regarding a possible failure of detonation. As they plunge toward the sun at a rapid pace, the detonation occurs and Robert cannot help but sigh with relief. He stands face to face with the explosion coming in contact with the fiery star. As both time and space are distorted by the explosion and the sun's flares, Robert smilingly spends his last moments touching the magnificent surface of the sun. Thus, the second Icarus project yields no survivors, much like the first one. Back on Earth, Robert's sister has just received his video message which he had sent earlier. His sister and her kids are all standing in the frozen wasteland right beside the Sydney harbor, playing and making snow out of the snow. All of a sudden, the sun becomes brighter, signifying that the mission is a success. As such, the crew members' sacrifices are not in vain. Although I find the plot of the movie to be typical in terms of horror movies set in outer space, it still manages to tell an interesting story regarding how momentous a simple decision or mistake can be. The movie shows that what is dangerous when traveling in space is not aliens or monsters, but rather the all-too-human tendency to commit mistakes and errors. Still, despite this tendency, the movie also shows that the noble quest to help each other in times of need still prevails, as evidenced by how the crew members still proceed with their mission to save humanity despite these problems.